Michael Bloomberg had an incredibly racist policy in New York City, stop and frisk. There's been a lot of discussion and debate about it. It essentially allowed police to profile black men, and they were harassed constantly in New York. Now, he was asked to talk about that during this debate.
Can I just say real quick, Anna, black and Latino men, specifically young black and Latino men, and it's not that the cops were allowed to, they were required to target them. And Bloomberg has even in the past said that maybe we stop white people too much. We shouldn't have stopped them at all. 93% of the stops were African American and Latino men. So that's why we call it racist. I don't want you to think that we're just throwing that word out there. And Bloomberg said, it doesn't matter that we didn't find guns on them. They found guns on people. That's what they were theoretically stopping them for 1.1% of the time if they were blacks or Latinos. By the way, whites were 1.7% higher. But he said if we didn't find it on a young black man, it's only because they kept their gun at home. So his assumption was black people are guilty whether they actually are or not. So it really literally can't quite get more racist than that. So that's why it's so important to see what his answer to this is.
Exactly, and you would think that as a candidate who's been dealing with a lot of controversy in regard to your stop and frisk policy. I mean, Obama, while he was president, wanted some oversight of what was going on in New York City. You would think that Bloomberg would be prepared. But we're about to show you, and I apologize, a 3-minute rambling video where Bloomberg struggles to say anything of substance. Take a look.
In 2015, this is how you describe your policing policy as mayor. Quote, we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. And you explain that as, quote, because that's where all the crime is. You went on to say, and the way you should get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them. You've apologized for that policy, but what does that kind of language say about how you view people of color or people in minority neighborhoods?
Well, if I go back and look at my time in office, the one thing that I'm really worried about, embarrassed about, was how it turned out with stop and frisk. When I got into office, there were 650 murders a year in New York City. And I thought that my first responsibility was to give people the right to live. That's the basic right of everything. And we adopted a policy which had been in place, the policy that all big police departments use of stop and frisk. What happened, however, was it got out of control. And when I discovered that we were doing too many stop and frisks, we cut 95% of it out. And I've sat down with a bunch of African-American clergy and business people to talk about this, to try to learn. I've talked to a number of kids who'd been stopped, and I was trying to understand how we change our policies so we can keep the city safe, because the crime rate did go from 650, 50% down to 300, and we have to keep the lid on crime, but we cannot go out and stop people indiscriminately.
Mayor, thank you. Let me go to Vice President Biden on this. You want to respond to that?
Yes, let's get something straight. The reason the stop and frisk changed is because Barack Obama sent moderators to see what was going on. When we sent them there to say this practice has to stop, the mayor thought it was a terrible idea.
Biden is absolutely right. Obama had to get involved, and Cenk, I'm gonna let you take this away.
Because so first of all, they're not moderators. Later he went on to say monitors. Joe, get the facts right. But when Bloomberg said, well, that's how it turned out. No, stop and frisk was designed to be racist. It didn't turn out to be racist. We have people on tape saying you must target blacks and Latinos. So it wasn't an accident. Whoopsie, we wound up targeting blacks and Latinos by mistake. That's why they call it a racist program, because it was by design that you did that. And then he said, well, by the end we largely cut it out. No, not true. They maintained it all the way through his 3 terms, and not only that, when the courts tried to stop him, because the courts said, no, that's wow, the application of that, let alone the design of it, is clearly racist, and they stopped it. Bloomberg kept fighting it in court. No, I'm gonna defend stop and frisk. After he left office, he still kept defending it. Some of those terrible comments that I told you about, they have it at home, was after he left office. So he was still defending it until he just started to run for president. The most disingenuous apology I've ever seen. And he said, and remember at the end, he came back to, but the crime rate went down. Wait a minute. That's not apologizing for it.
Right.
Now you're making it seem like, oh, well, I targeted black people and the crime rate went down. No, that's the exact opposite of an apology.
Apparently it didn't get out of control because you say it worked. After you said, hey, my only regret is that it got out of control. First of all, if it got out of control, who's in control of that? So say it wasn't even your thing, but it got out of control, man. I came in as this great angelic figure that's gonna make things happen right, and it got out of my control. Hey, you're running for president of the United States. What else might get out of your control? That's a problem, number one. And the fact that he went through all that thing, the highlight, or at least the theme of that approach was, when you don't care, you just don't care, and it's illustrative of it. So he said he talked to black clergymen and business people, and some of those kids that were victims of stop and frisk. I don't know, maybe I missed it. And I'm saying this in all honesty. Usually when you say maybe I missed it, you're being sarcastic. Where are the videos of him talking to 18 to 24-year-old black and Latino guys that were stopped, slammed against walls? And then where's the video of them telling him how devastating that was and what they should do differently? I'd like to see that video because, I mean, maybe he did talk to them, but what he didn't do was promote it. What he didn't do was put it in his campaign ads, or before this, talk about how he's talking to black and Latinos to ask them what they experience under him. We did see videos of him talking about how great it was. We did see videos of him talking about how much the police loved doing it and how much it worked. We see him all the time talking about how great it was. We don't see him in videos talking to the people who were actually affected by it, because he doesn't care about those people. Those people were used at the time to promote himself as this crime fighter, and now used to promote himself as this reformed person who things just got out of control. Yeah. No, you can't manipulate things every which way you want to, because they're still human beings that were the victims of your policy, and they will speak out, but you're just gonna try and silence them.
I think this was one of two areas where they didn't go nearly hard enough, and they really allowed him to some extent sort of define what this issue is for him. The timeline is obviously, as you pointed out, not right at all. He didn't notice that it was going out of control and then he shut it down. He was forced to shut it down. And even after he left office, he spent years defending the policy. And think about how committed to a racist policy a person needs to be, that even like a year and a half into him thinking about the possibility of running as a Democrat, he still wouldn't apologize for it. He only did it insultingly, begrudgingly, a few months before running, because he thinks that you won't see what that means. He thinks he can purchase enough ads that you'll forget about all that. And also on the facts of stop and frisk and its supposed connection to stopping crime, he ended his comment by effectively saying, yeah, it was bad, but it cut crime. Except that there's no actual demonstrable connection between those two things. And in fact, when they stopped stop and frisk, you would think that if it was so important in stopping crime, the crime would have then gone up. But it did not, in fact. And so all of that suffering that you presided over, that you expanded, was needless, even for your stated goal of cutting down on murders. It didn't even accomplish that.
When de Blasio came in and became mayor, they stopped stop and frisk. Crime went down, not up. So they never had the point of bringing crime down. And no matter how many facts they saw that it wasn't doing the job, that it was not related to the crime going down, they thought, yeah, but the blacks and Latinos must be doing the crime. It's pretty much the definition of racism.
Well, and super fast. So imagine if you're,
Can we stop saying super fast?
This is like the Biden thing. I could have been done by now. So imagine if you're a billionaire thinking about there's pros and cons. Pro, I think it'll cut crime. Con, it's gonna devastate these people's lives. But if those lives don't mean anything to me, if people like me will never be affected by this policy, I don't need to be that sure that it's gonna have a positive effect. I can just gamble and see what happens because it doesn't have any negative impact on my life.
Okay, let's go to Warren's response to all of this.
I do think that this really is about leadership and accountability. When the mayor says that he apologized, listen very closely to the apology. The language he used is about stop and frisk. It's about how it turned out. Now, this isn't about how it turned out. This is about what it was designed to do to begin with. It targeted communities of color. It targeted black and brown men from the beginning. And if you want to issue a real apology, then the apology has to start with the intent of the plan as it was put together and the willful ignorance day by day by day of admitting what was happening, even as people protested in your own street, shutting out the sounds of people telling you how your own policy was breaking their lives. You need a different apology here.
Devastating. That's Joe. That's how you do it.
And that's how you approach something. This is very much based off of a racial-based issue. Obviously, Black and Latinos. That's who they were targeting. Now, that's how you represent and give a policy and talk about how you're angry about what happened without saying, hey, you know, black people in South Carolina, they support me. Black people in New York, they support me. Hey, black people, they said they like me. Just talk about the issue and talk about the problems and say what we need to do differently that actually affects this group of people that you claim supports you, and they will just naturally support you because you're speaking to their issue rather than speaking at them.
Yeah, I'll say one thing about the media. So to be fair, they did ask a question about it. Yeah. I wasn't sure that they were going to, so thank you, Lester Holt, for asking the question. Now, on the other hand, I remember back in 2015, 2016, when Bernie Sanders was not polling well in South Carolina, that's because he had almost no name recognition. The media made a big stink out of it and made it seem as if, well, Bernie's not good with African Americans. Based on what? Based on no actual substance, policy, or anything along those lines. No actual allegations, just, well, he's not polling well with African Americans yet. Okay, by the way, now he's #1 with African Americans. So that isn't that interesting, right? But with Bloomberg, here's a policy that he not only implemented, advocated for, and fought for, even after it was proven to be indisputably racist. And we've got kind of like, that's interesting. If Bernie had done a policy when he was mayor of Burlington that on purpose targeted blacks and Latinos, and Bernie had said, like Bloomberg did, oh, we shouldn't have targeted whites at all. Anytime we stop whites, it was a waste of time because whites are innocent. It's just blacks and Latinos we got to go after. Everyone would have disqualified him immediately. And by the way, they should. Yeah. They should. And here's Bloomberg, and people going, that's kind of interesting. No, that's not kind of interesting. If anything is disqualifying, that's it. Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, Jayar. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.